In 1989, on the streets of Washington, D.C., the city people called the murder capital of America, drug dealers quit driving expensive cars. Not because they lacked the money to buy them, not because law enforcement was watching, not because of any regulation, any squad, any raid, but because of a single individual. If this individual spotted you in something flashy, he assumed you were carrying money. And if he assumed that, he was coming to take it. Not the next day, not the following week, that very night. He would figure out where you stayed. He would walk through the darkness to your home. He would lie down in your yard, in the grass, behind the trash bin, in the bushes right next to your front door. And he would stay there the entire night, not moving, not making a single sound, just breathing, slow and patient, like a man who had absolutely nowhere else to go. And when you stepped outside in the morning thinking it was just another ordinary day, thinking you were safe because the sun had risen and people were around, he would rise to his feet, walk directly toward you close enough to look into your eyes and put 7 bullets in your skull like it meant nothing. Then he would walk away. Not run, just walk. Sometimes he would return 20 minutes later, after the cops had arrived, after the ambulance had pulled up, after the yellow tape had been wrapped around the body. He would come back to that same crime scene, stand on the corner, watch, making sure nobody was speaking to the officers. And nobody was. Nobody ever was, because every single person on that block knew exactly who had done it. And every single person on that block knew exactly what would happen to them if they opened their mouth. He did not do drive-bys. He did not shoot from a distance. He did not send someone else to handle his affairs. He walked up to you personally, face to face, and handled it himself every single time. "I don't play that across the street business," he said. "I walk right up and put 7 in the head like it ain't nothing." The biggest dealer in D.C. tried to purchase his loyalty. He turned it down. Hustlers who had been making money for years stopped showing off in public because they did not want this man to take notice of them. He robbed attorneys. He extorted drug lords. He tracked down killers the way other men tracked down deer, patient and calculated, without a single moment of hesitation. One of his associates popped open his car trunk one day and discovered hand grenades, sticks of dynamite, a row of firearms and product. This man kept a full arsenal the way most people keep a spare tire. The Washington Post called him one of the district's most horrific murderers. Don Diva magazine gave him a title that stuck forever, the Michael Jordan of the murder game. And in 2013, Jay-Z dropped his name in a verse on Magna Carta Holy Grail. "This is my Wayne Perry flow. Y'all know nothing about Wayne Perry though, District of Columbia." Suddenly, millions of people who had never heard of Southwest D.C. were searching for a man who had been locked inside a concrete box for 2 decades. His name was Wayne Perry. The streets called him Silk. But here is what Jay-Z did not rap about. Here is what the Washington Post never printed. Here is what the streets still whisper about to this day. The most feared killer in the history of the murder capital was taken down by the one person he trusted with everything. The man he shielded, the man he killed for. The man he kept alive inside jail when everyone else wanted him dead. That man looked him straight in the eyes, shook his hand, called him brother, and then walked into a federal building and handed over every name, every body, every single detail. And the very first name he gave them was Silk. Years later, from a prison cell inside the most secure facility in America, he spoke 7 words that are impossible to forget. 7 words that reveal everything about this story and everything about the man who lived it. "I am a very loyal man." He was, and that loyalty is exactly what destroyed him. This is the story of Wayne "Silk" Perry, the man who hunted killers in the murder capital, and the lesson he learned far too late about what loyalty earns you when you hand it to a snake. To understand what Wayne Perry became, you first have to understand where he came from. Not the man himself, but the place, because the place explains absolutely everything. Southwest Washington, D.C. Some people called it Chocolate City, others called it Drama City. Most people simply called it what it was, one of the worst ghettos in the entire country. Tenement houses, rundown motels, rat-infested apartment buildings, and on L Street in the section they called 203, a stretch of blocks so rough that even the rest of Southwest wanted nothing to do with it. 203 had the worst violence, the worst crime, the worst of everything the city had decided to dump into one place and then forget about. The people who grew up there had two ways out: sports or crime. That was it. No third option, no backup plan, no guidance counselor sitting you down to discuss college applications. You either had talent or you had nerve, and if you were fortunate, you had both. Wayne Anthony Perry was born on November 14, 1962. He grew up right there on L Street in 203 and spent his summers down in Georgia with relatives. But D.C. was home. And in D.C., from the moment he was old enough to hold a bat, he was the finest athlete anyone had ever laid eyes on. Baseball, boxing, basketball, football, MVP in everything he touched. His half-brother Lop gave him a nickname based on how smoothly he moved on the field: Silk. But here is the thing about growing up in 203. The older hustlers watched this kid play sports, watched him compete, watched him fight, watched how he carried himself, and they did not see a future baseball player. They did not see a scholarship. They did not see a way out. They saw a weapon. "They knew I'd shoot anybody," Silk told Don Diva magazine years later. "Police, killers, guerrillas. I used to go on robberies with some serious gangsters, but they always took the bullets out of my gun because they said I was trigger happy." Let that sink in. Grown men, seasoned criminals robbing establishments, and they removed the bullets from the kid's gun before heading inside, because even they were frightened of what a 13-year-old Wayne Perry might do if that gun was loaded. By 1974, Silk was 12 years old and had already taken his first life. By 1975, he was hustling full-time. By 1976, he was running rigged dice games and marked card scams on grown men twice his age. The older gamblers brought him everywhere because they thought the kid was lucky. He was not lucky. He was cheating them. And he was 14 years old. Silk attended Wilson High School, supposedly a place to receive an education. In reality, it was a gladiator school. Northwest gangs versus Southwest gangs. Riots in the hallways every single week. Unarmed guards in every corridor because the school could not afford anything better. One day, a riot erupted. Someone shot one of the guards. Police arrived. Every gang member in that hallway pointed at Silk. He insisted he had not done it. He said the real shooters set him up because they knew he would not snitch and would fight it out. He was charged with attempted murder. The court dismissed it for lack of evidence. Wilson expelled him regardless. They transferred him to Randall High School, where he played baseball, boxed, and played basketball and football. He was still the best athlete on every team he joined. Until one day at practice, he beat his baseball coach with a bat. Not a fist fight, not an argument that escalated. A bat. During practice, on the field, in front of the entire team. They did not simply expel him from Randall. They did not just remove him from the team. They banned Wayne Perry from every single public school in the District of Columbia. A judge ordered him to attend Franklin GED school. According to Silk, someone at Franklin made the mistake of threatening to take his chain. That person did not take the chain. By the late 1970s, school was finished. Silk graduated to the streets. Bank robberies at 16. His younger brother was killed by police inside a bank in 1979. Whatever thin thread had been holding Silk back from going completely over the edge snapped. It never came back together. In 1984, a man came looking for Silk. He found him on the street. The man drew a gun and fired. He missed. Silk did not miss. He killed the man right in front of a parked police vehicle. The officers sitting inside that car testified it was self-defense. A man shot dead on the sidewalk with police watching, and they ruled it self-defense. That tells you everything about what Silk's reputation was in 1984. Even the police were not going to argue with him. But it was still a body. They sent him to Lorton's Youth Center 1, one of the most violent prisons in America at that time. Walking into Youth Center 1 was like walking into a war zone. The inmates ran the facility. Kill or be killed. Not a figure of speech. Literal. Silk did not just survive Lorton. He thrived. He came out in 1987 with a new skill set, a new reputation, and a new business plan. He was not going to hustle anymore. He was not going to rob banks. He was not going to run dice games or card scams. He was going to track people down for money. And Washington, D.C., the city that was about to become the murder capital of the United States, had absolutely no idea what was walking back into it. You need to understand what D.C. looked like in the late 1980s, because without that context, what Silk did sounds like exaggeration. It is not. The crack epidemic had transformed the nation's capital into a slaughterhouse. In 1991, Washington, D.C. recorded 482 murders, 6 per 100,000 residents, the highest rate in the entire United States. They did not call it Chocolate City anymore. They called it the murder capital, and that name was earned in blood. 482 bodies in a city of 600,000 people. If New York City had the same rate, it would have meant nearly 6,000 murders in a single year. D.C. was the most dangerous place in America, and it was not even close. Rail Edmond was flooding the streets with product. The shower posse was tearing apart neighborhoods. Teenagers were dying on corners every single night. The police could not contain it. The government could not contain it. Nobody could stop it. And in the middle of all that chaos, while every dealer, every hustler, every killer in D.C. was making more money than they had ever seen, there was one man who was more terrifying than all of it put together. Drug dealers stopped driving expensive cars. Because if Silk noticed you, if Silk decided you had something he wanted, there was no negotiation. There was no paying him off. There was no talking your way out. Rail Edmond, the single largest supplier D.C. had ever seen, a man moving more product than anyone in the entire city, attempted to purchase Silk's loyalty. He sent loads of supply down to 203, free product, a peace offering from the most powerful dealer in Washington. Silk refused. Nah, I'm cool. I don't want nothing from you. Think about that. The most powerful dealer in the history of D.C. tries to bring you in, offers you free product, offers you a seat at the biggest table in the city, and you say no. Not because you have a better arrangement, not because you fear the heat, but because you refuse to be owned by anyone. Silk wanted to carve his own path. His plan was straightforward. He would take what he wanted from anyone too weak to stop him. He would eliminate anyone who needed eliminating for the right price, and he would answer to nobody. Not Rail Edmond, not the police, not the federal government. Nobody. Here is what separated Silk from every other killer in the murder capital, and there were hundreds. DC had bodies dropping every night, but nobody operated the way Wayne Perry did. Most killers are reactive. Someone disrespects them, they react. Someone moves in on their corner, they react. Someone talks, they react. Silk was proactive. He did not sit around waiting for problems. He went out searching for them. He hunted. One time, a friend had his corner taken over by a dealer from New York. The New Yorker told Silk's associate he could not work that spot until the New Yorker was finished. Silk's friend came to him frightened. Silk told the kid to go back outside and sell. The kid hesitated. Silk told him, "If I said it's cool, it's cool." The kid went back to the corner. The New York dealer came around the building to say something about it. Silk stepped out from beside the wall and emptied every round in the clip into the man's skull. Then he walked back inside and continued his conversation like absolutely nothing had occurred. Another time, he forced a man to strip completely naked inside a mall. Broad daylight, people all around. He made the man remove every piece of clothing and then shot him right there, to prove to everyone watching that the man was not as tough as he claimed. He showed up at outdoor basketball tournaments and gunned down targets in the middle of crowds. He killed during the lunch rush. He killed with police a single block away. He killed on corners where 50 people were standing. And when he walked away, nobody saw a thing. And his trunk. One of his associates opened Silk's car trunk one day and discovered hand grenades, sticks of dynamite, a rack of firearms and product. This man kept a small arsenal in his vehicle, the way most people keep a spare tire. One associate from that era said that when Silk first began accepting payment for hits, nobody in the city even knew who was responsible. People were saying it was a hitman from Detroit somewhere. It was not a hitman from Detroit. It was a man from L Street who slept in your yard and waited until sunrise. In 1989, Rail Edmond got locked up. The biggest supplier in DC was gone. His territory was completely wide open. Every corner, every strip, every block that Rail had controlled was suddenly available for the taking. From Harlem, a flashy, smooth-talking dealer named Alpo Martinez looked at that vacancy the way a shark looks at blood in the water. Alpo was already well known. He had run alongside Rich Porter and AZ Faison, the three Harlem dealers whose story would later become the film Paid in Full, with Cameron playing Alpo's character. But Alpo had a serious problem. He had murdered his own closest friend, Rich Porter, over money, shot him dead. And Rich Porter's 12-year-old brother Donald had been taken for ransom and turned up dead. New York was on fire for Alpo. He needed a new city. DC was the answer, but DC hustlers did not welcome outsiders. And Alpo, for all his flash and all his money, understood he needed one thing he could not purchase in Harlem. He needed a killer, not just any killer. He needed the killer, the one nobody in DC would challenge, the one whose name alone could empty a room. He needed Silk. There are two versions of how they first met. Silk's version was that he had wanted to kill Alpo before they ever shook hands. A woman had told Silk that Alpo was putting a contract out on him. Silk went hunting. His close associate Lil Pop stepped in at the East Side Club and introduced them. Alpo begged for his life. Alpo's version was that he violated Silk out of jail, and Silk was so grateful he became his bodyguard. The truth does not matter. What matters is the outcome. Silk became Alpo's enforcer, his hitman, his shield, the man who ensured nobody touched Alpo's operation anywhere in DC, Virginia, or Maryland. And business exploded. The Martinez organization moved roughly 500 kilograms of product valued at $65 million through 4 states. Silk was the engine. Alpo was the mouth. Together, they were the most dangerous partnership in the murder capital, but it was never equal. It was never a genuine partnership between two men. It was one man doing all the work and one man keeping all the records. Silk was the one dropping bodies. Silk was the one hunting targets in the dark. Silk was the one making sure Alpo could rest safely at night. And Alpo was taking notes, writing down names, memorizing details, building a file he did not yet realize he was building. Because Alpo was born with a gift that Silk never possessed and never understood, the ability to betray without any hesitation. Between 1989 and 1991, the Martinez organization left 9 bodies across Washington, D.C. Federal authorities would later claim that Silk was the primary shooter in 8 of those 9. Domenico Benson, a Brooklyn dealer who had slapped Alpo's wife. Silk walked up to Benson while the man was shaking Alpo's hand, shaking his hand, and shot him dead right there, mid-handshake. Garrett Terrell, a rival dealer in Washington, D.C. who made the mistake of putting a contract out on Silk. Silk reached him first. He always reached them first. But the killing that tells you everything, the one that haunts this entire story, is Evelyn Carter. Carter was Silk's girlfriend. She was speaking with police. They were investigating the murder of a dealer named Michael Frey Salters, and Carter had information that could connect Silk to the killing. But here is the twist that turns your stomach. According to Silk, he did not kill Frey. A member of his own crew, a man named Michael Jackson, killed Frey on Alpo's orders. Then Jackson went to Frey's funeral and told everyone that Silk had done it. Evelyn Carter heard that lie at the funeral. And Jackson, to cover himself, told Silk that Carter was the one running her mouth. So Silk, out of loyalty to a man who was framing him, murdered the woman in his own life. After a Keith Sweat concert at Constitution Hall, Silk grabbed Evelyn Carter. He stabbed her in the face. He shot her 5 times, dead. Years later, from a prison cell, Silk said the following: "May she rest in peace. If I would have let her talk, she would have told me the truth. But I would not have listened because I stand for loyalty. And my loyalty was with that dude. That was my man, but he was a snake. He killed the one person who could have rescued him because he was loyal to the one person who was ruining him. And he was about to discover just how loyal that person was in return." On November 6, 1991, federal authorities arrested Alpo Martinez. Drug charges, murder charges, conspiracy, everything. They placed Alpo inside a Washington, D.C. jail where half the inmates wanted him dead. Rivals, enemies, men who had been waiting for the day Alpo no longer had Silk standing beside him, who kept him alive. Silk. From inside the same jail system, Silk sent the word out. Anyone who touches Alpo will not live to see the outside. Not a threat, a guarantee. From the most feared man in the building, nobody touched Alpo, not one single person. The most despised individual in Washington, D.C. walked through that jail untouched because Wayne Perry said so. Now think about what was happening at the exact same time. Down the hall, behind a closed door, Alpo was sitting across from federal prosecutors and he was singing. Every name, every body, every detail, every murder Silk had committed, every murder Silk had not committed that Alpo pinned on him anyway. The man Silk was shielding was the man burying him. The man Silk was willing to die for was the man signing his death warrant. Silk later said he was a very loyal man. He said he did not fear anything or anyone but God. "The fear of weaker guys put me in prison." He is not referring to the feds. He is not referring to the police. He is referring to Alpo, the man who was too weak to stand up and bear his own weight. The man who handed over everyone around him to save himself. The man who was weaker than anyone Silk had ever hunted on the streets of D.C. And that weak man's words put Silk in a cage for the remainder of his life. December 4th, 1992. Silk walked into court expecting to plead guilty to a minor charge, selling product to an undercover officer. A fine, maybe a few months. Instead, the Safe Streets Task Force was waiting. They arrested him in the courtroom and charged him with the murder of Garrett Terrell in furtherance of a continuing criminal enterprise. December 5th, 1992. The Washington Times ran a headline declaring a suspected hitman arrested in a 1991 killing. March 6, 1993. The Washington Post reported a 27-count indictment. Wayne Perry, Tyrone Price, and Michael Jackson were charged with 9 murders, racketeering conspiracy, drug distribution conspiracy, retaliating against a witness, kidnapping, and robbery. And then the federal government did something that had not been done in D.C. since 1971. They sought the death penalty. Wayne Silk Perry was going to be the first person executed in the District of Columbia in over 20 years. The voters of D.C. had just rejected the death penalty by a 2-to-1 margin. But this was federal court, federal statute, and a 1987 law stated that murder in furtherance of a drug conspiracy was a death-eligible offense. They were measuring Silk for a casket using Alpo's words as the tape measure. April 1st, 1994. The Washington Post ran a headline reading, "Killer Cop's Plea Gets Life Sentence in 5 Murders." Silk pleaded guilty to 5 counts of first-degree murder, naming Domenico Benson, Evelyn Carter, Yolanda Burley, Alveda Hopkins, and Garrett Terrell, plus continuing criminal enterprise. In exchange, the death penalty was taken off the table. Silk told Don Diva that he had not pleaded out because of the death penalty. He said he lived to die and that he pleaded out to ensure others did not receive life sentences. He said he took the bull by the horns to protect others. That was the kind of man he was. Even at the very end, even with the walls closing in around him, even knowing that Alpo had betrayed him, that everything he had constructed was gone, that he would never walk a free street again, he was still protecting other people. 5 consecutive life sentences, no possibility of parole. They shackled him, handcuffed him, loaded him into a transport vehicle, and shipped him to ADX Florence, Colorado, the federal supermax, the most secure prison in America, the place where they send the men the government never wants to see again. Silk was 31 years old. For snitching on Silk and dozens of others, Alpo Martinez received 35 years, not 5 life sentences. 35 years for confessing to 14 murders, including the killing of his own best friend Rich Porter. Silk got life for 5. Alpo got 35 for 14. Read that again and sit with it. In 2015, the federal government released Alpo, gave him a new identity, Abraham Rodriguez, placed him in Lewiston, Maine. Population 36,000. A quiet town, polite neighbors. Nobody knew who he was. He helped elderly people take out their trash. But Alpo could not leave it alone. He could not be Abraham Rodriguez. By 2019, he was back in Harlem, making YouTube videos, bragging about the old days, riding motorcycles through the same blocks where he had sold product 30 years earlier, discarding his witness protection like a used napkin. October 31st, 2021. Halloween night, 3:30 in the morning, 147th Street and Frederick Douglass Boulevard, Harlem. Alpo Martinez was seated in his red Dodge Ram pickup when someone approached the driver's side window. 5 shots. Chest, chin, arm. He drove one more block, crashed. And in his final moments, bleeding out in the driver's seat, he tossed bags of product out the window. Still dealing, still hustling, still running the game even as he died. He was pronounced dead at Harlem Hospital. Rich Porter's family poured champagne in the streets. The man charged with the murder was acquitted in 2024. The killing remains effectively unsolved. Meanwhile, inside ADX Florence, behind concrete walls 3 feet thick, Silk sits. He converted to Islam, changed his name to Enosi Shaka Zulu L. He has been inside that cell for over 30 years. He will never leave. The man who snitched walked free and died on the street at 3 in the morning throwing product out his window. The man who stayed loyal will never breathe free air again. Washington, D.C. recorded 482 murders in 1991, the year Silk was at his peak. In 2012, that number fell to 88. The streets Silk terrorized now have coffee shops and condominiums. The corners where people lost their lives now have strollers rolling past them. The murder capital is no longer the murder capital. And the most feared man who ever walked its streets is locked in a box in Colorado, forgotten by everyone except the people who grew up in 203, the people who read Seth Ferrante's book, and the millions who heard Jay-Z speak his name and had to search for it. But here is the thing I keep returning to. The thing that makes this story different from every other gangster story on the internet. Silk was not brought down by the police. He was not brought down by a rival. He was not brought down by a task force, an investigation, or a wire. He was brought down by the one person he loved enough to kill for, to shield in jail, to accept 5 life sentences for. He was the greatest hunter the murder capital ever produced. He could locate anyone, track anyone, lie in the dark all night waiting for anyone. He could read the streets like an open book. He could sense danger from a block away. But he could not see the snake seated right beside him, eating his food, spending his money, calling him brother. Because loyalty blinded him. And loyalty, the very same loyalty that made him the most feared and the most respected man in D.C., is what placed him in that box. "I am a very loyal man," he said. "I don't fear nothing and no one but God. The fear of weaker guys put me in prison." 7 words. The fear of weaker guys put me in prison. He does not blame the feds. He does not blame the judge. He does not blame the system. He blames the weakness of the man he trusted. And that is the lesson. Not about guns, not about the streets, not about the murder capital. The lesson is this. The thing that makes you great can be the exact same thing that destroys you. And you will not see it coming because it is not coming from your enemies. It is coming from the person sitting right beside you. Think about that.